One sorry for my response drop. That was today. It's June 2nd, 2021, and today we're gonna forecast what type of conditions you'll experience in each area in the United States for the month of June. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather records, and make sure to like if you like this video, and make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather records. So let's begin by taking a look at the Enzo pattern forecast for over the next several months. Well, let's actually begin with what's happening right now when it comes to what Enzo pattern where we are currently at right now. And you see that if we take a look at the Nino 3.4 region, which is a region synonymous with forecasting what type of Enzo pattern we'll experience, you see that for most of the year, for at least most of the past 12 months to date, you see that we have been in a La Nina phase for the most part, with maybe close to the neutral phase right around the month of June of 2020. And you see now the sea surface temperatures right around the Nino 3.4 region are starting to rebound, which means that we're entering more and more into a neutral phase. And I'd say at this point, we're right around the month, we're at June right now. I'd say at this point you could almost consider the Enzo pattern at a neutral phase right now rather than a La Nina phase, which may be good news for the hurricane season since it might not be as strong. But in terms of the differences between neutral phases and La Nina phases, there isn't a ton of difference, but I'll get to that in a little bit. Taking a look at the current forecast when it comes to the Enzo pattern over the next several months, you see that this as of early May, as of May 13th, 2021, and you see that for the month for the month of June, the most likely scenario is that we're going to be in a neutral phase during the month of June, with the only around a 30% chance of a La Nina phase occurring during the month of June, and pretty much an impossible chance of El Nino during the month of June. So it's safe to primarily expect neutral type conditions for the month of June for this year. In terms of what a neutral pattern looks like, as you can see, it isn't very different from what you typically experience with a La Nina, because if you were to take a look at La Nina, you see that both the Enzo neutral phase and a La Nina both have a well-defined polar jet stream dip. They both have sort of a Pacific jet stream moving through this area, and they are more, I'd say, warm in the southern portion. However, there are certainly some differences, like like in the Enzo neutral pattern, I'd say that it is a little bit more wet closer to the southeastern Enzo neutral pattern, while during a La Nina it's a bit more dry, because during an Enzo neutral pattern we're more likely to see a subtropical jet stream move through this area, which means that there's going to be more troughs coming from the south and entering the southeast, so we're more likely to see more moist than average conditions during an Enzo neutral pattern. And you also see that during a La Nina, I'd say we're more likely to see more jet stream dips than, let's say, an Enzo neutral pattern, because in the Enzo neutral pattern is pretty much something between a La Nina and El Nino. And of course, during an El Nino, the jet stream is way up north, which typically means that most of the United States experiences warmer than average conditions, while during a La Nina phase, the jet stream dip is more pronounced, and that brings cooler than average conditions throughout the eastern half of the United States. And while it is primarily the same for an Enzo neutral pattern, I wouldn't say the jet stream dips will be as defined. But for the most part, like I said, Enzo neutral pattern and a La Nina pattern are very similar when it comes to the conditions you'll experience it outside of the fact that it's primarily drier during a La Nina in the southeast and the Enzo neutral pattern. So that's certainly something to keep in mind. If we were to go by the forecasted Enzo pattern for the month of June, then you should expect colder than average conditions, typically for the Northeast and into the Great Lakes region, warmer than average conditions for most of the southern United States and even extending towards the West Coast, and more moist than average conditions I'd say in the southeast and just south of or right around the Ohio River valleys. And I'd say it's going to be more moist overall in the eastern half of the United States because there's more jet stream dips, because there's a pronounced jet stream dip, and we have a subtropical jet that's going to bring more troughs into the eastern half of the United States. So overall, more moist than average in the eastern half and more dry than average, I'd say, in the western half of the United States during Enzo neutral pattern. However, despite the pretty big impact the Enzo pattern could bring to what you'd experience in June, the type of conditions, there's still a lot more we have to take a look at to determine what type of what type of conditions in the month of June you'll experience in each area. And one of those things that we could take a look at is the current drought monitor for the United States. This is valid as of May 25th, 2021, so approximately about a week from now. So it's pretty much up to date for the most part. And if we compare this drought monitor to what we saw the month prior, there are very little differences, as pretty much most of the places that were dry at the end of April to the beginning of May stayed dry up till now. And for the places that were outside of the drought criteria, it's pretty much stayed the same for the most part, although it did get slightly drier in the eastern half of the United States. But one thing I did notice is that a lot of the eastern half of Texas did get moistened up a little bit to get out of a drought, which is certainly good news. We do not want to see major drought in any area in the United States, so that's certainly good news. But for the most of the western half of the United States, it's just been staying dry for the past month. And like I said in my previous monthly forecast for the month of May, it's very hard to get out of a drought just like that. It usually takes weeks to months to really get out of a drought. It takes just slowly but surely the atmosphere moistening up. It takes a lot of time because during a drought, it's pretty much an endless cycle that pretty much promotes drought conditions to occur, because when there's a drought, there's less water along the surface for the atmosphere to evaporate, which means less precipitation overall. And it pretty much just continues an endless cycle, and there really needs to be a stark contrast in the pattern over the next month to completely take the western half of the United States out of a drought, and that seems unlikely. So for a lot of the western half of the United States, I'd say you should expect drier than average conditions again for the next month, because like I said before, like since it's been so dry for so long, it's going to be very hard for within 1 month to completely get out of drought-like conditions. So I expect it to be dry because it really takes it's really difficult for the atmosphere to remove a big dominant ridge right around this region when there isn't enough rising air or enough force in that enough buoyant force in the atmosphere to lift a lot of the air molecules to create precipitation events in the western half of the United States. So I'd expect it to be much drier and warmer than average in the western half of the United States as a result of this ongoing drought that's occurring, which is unfortunate because we certainly do not want to see a drought, and that could raise a concern for wildfires later in the summer, which is certainly something we do not want to see. However, for the eastern half of the United States, it's going to be you guys are mainly going to be out of the drought conditions, I'd say, since the dominating ridge is well far to the west. So I don't expect it to be at least as dry as the western half of the United States, obviously. But another thing we need to take a look at, which is a pretty big factor when forecasting what type of conditions we'll experience for the month, is the computer models, and more specifically the climatology computer models like the CFS model. So this is the temperature anomaly forecast for the month of June, and pretty much what this means is that if you're in the reds and the oranges, it's more likely you're gonna experience warmer than average June in your location. However, if you're in the blues, that means you're more likely to experience a cooler than average June. And you see that for most of the United States, it's expected to be warmer than average, especially along the west coast and into the northeast, where warmer than average conditions are expected throughout the northeast and the West Coast. And it's obvious why we're going to experience warmer than average conditions on the West Coast. You guys been on an ongoing drought. There's going to be less clouds in the atmosphere as a result of just a very potent drought in that area. And so that's going to allow shortwave radiation from the sun to really heat up the surface to make it a very warm June for a lot of you guys on the West Coast. And same go and for as for the Northeast, since there's going to be so many troughs coming from the south, we're more likely to see that humid air and a strong southerly flow bring warmer air further northward. So I'd expect it to be much warmer than average for a lot of the Northeast as a result of that. And and the current forecast from the CFS is that it's actually going to be cooler than average right around the Midwest. So I'm not sure exactly why. I suspect it's probably due to the increased amount of precipitation that's expected. And of course, when there's more precipitation, especially in the southeast, that means that there's more going to be more clouds that's going to block shortwave radiation from the sun from hitting the surface. So as a result, it should be cooler than average. Um, but from the northeast, since the northeast isn't like as used to very warm air, that there's gonna be strong southerly flow to bring that warmer air from the south northward, which will make it a warmer than average June for a lot of you guys in the northeast. Now, in terms of the precipitation anomaly, you see that most of the eastern half of the United States is expected to be more moist than average. As you could see, there's going to be a lot more moisture than average along the southeast, right around Louisiana, Alabama, and this extends to the northeast as well. Even right around Minnesota and Dakotas could get more precipitation than average, as we expect more troughs to move through as a result of an Enzo neutral pattern, where we will see a jet stream dip and a subtropical jet bring a lot of troughs from the south and bring it further northward to make it more moist than average. To make it a more moist than average June for a lot of you guys in the eastern half of the United States. And you see that for the western half of the United States, while the CFS model is currently forecasting mainly an average to a more dry than average June, I'd suspect that I suspect that the CFS is underestimating this a little bit, because I don't think it's really it's really synthesizing the data based off the how strong this drought has been. So as a result, I do expect it to be much drier than average on the western half of the United States. So keep that in mind throughout the Rocky Mountains and into the Pacific Coast for drier than average conditions. Another thing we also need to take a look at is the Arctic oscillation, because of course the Arctic oscillation does play a pivotal role in what you type of conditions you'll experience within a given month or within a few weeks. And you see that the forecast has been leaning towards more of a positive phase, which would mean that there's going to be less jet stream dips, and that would mean that's primarily going to be warmer than average throughout the United States. And since we've been in a negative Arctic oscillation phase for quite a while, I'd say beginning of like middle April, I do expect it to at least rebound to maybe positive at right around this time. Because you notice, like, if you take a look even in the past, it's very difficult for the Arctic oscillation pattern to not last for at least a month or 3 months, as it typically takes time for an Arctic oscillation phase to completely change over, because you see that between the middle of February and all the way into mid-April, pretty much a 2 month span, you guys in the United States primarily been in a positive phase, and beginning right around middle April and now into, I'd say, middle of May and into early June, you guys been in a negative phase, slightly negative phase. So it pretty much proves that that a phase typically lasts for a couple months. And I think since we've been in negative phase for quite some time, it's almost a given to expect to be in a positive phase head into the month of June, which would mean a warmer than average June for a lot of you guys in the United States. And that should certainly promote less precipitation in this case when there's less jet stream dips. So keep that in mind. We have to keep that in mind as well. And another thing is the sea surface temperatures. And as you can see, this is as of late May, and you see that surprisingly a lot of the Atlantic at this point is under cooler than average sea surface temperatures. While of course in my previous video I did say that I do expect these sea surface temperatures to rise and make it a more active than usual hurricane season. The fact that we're experiencing cooler than average sea surface temperatures right now might make it a little bit more dry along the Gulf Coast and right around Florida, because there's going to be less humidity in the atmosphere with cooler than average sea surface temperatures and less lift in the atmosphere. However, I don't think it's enough to outweigh what the climatology computer models are saying and what the Enzo pattern is, and the Enzo pattern that's forecast, the neutral pattern. So I still do expect it to be more moist than average throughout the eastern half of the United States, but still there is maybe that possibility along the coast it will be cooler than average thanks to less lift in the atmosphere. So definitely keep that in mind. And it might limit the chance of tropical cyclones as well. So that's also something to keep in mind. However, I don't think it's enough to outweigh what the more moist than average conditions you're expected to experience based off what the CFS model is saying and the Enzo pattern we're expecting into the month of June. Now, in terms of my total June forecast, I'm gonna go region by region. So I'd say for a lot of the northern United States, I do expect it to be very warm and more moist than average, because there's going to be a strong southerly flow as a result of the increased amount of troughs moving through, as thanks to a subtropical jet during a neutral pattern, which will bring a stronger southerly flow to bring that warm air further northward. And I do expect it to be very much more moist in the southeast as a result of an Enzo neutral pattern, and based on what the CFS model is saying. And I do expect it to be cooler than moist than average based off what the CFS model is saying. And for a lot of the western half of the United States, I do expect it to be much drier than average thanks to the ongoing drought that's expected to continue for months on end. So keep that in mind for the month of June. Remember, take this with a grain of salt, because it's difficult to forecast long-term forecasts like the entire month. But I'd say you should believe this at least more. I'd say it's more likely than not the conditions like this will happen, but again, it could easily be wrong. So make sure to take it with a grain of salt. Anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather accounts. Make sure to like if you like this video. Make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather content. And I hope you guys have a good day.